Hello, 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 and welcome to the CTSA Simply Reds podcast. We're back, and this time it isn't a special interview unless you classify Louie as a special guest, but we've seen him too many times now, so I guess ultimately he is just part of the furniture. I am Luke, and I am joined by Louie. Louie, how are you?
I'm very well, mate. How are you?
Good. I am very well indeed.
Good
The
stuff.
summer, I've realised, can quickly come to... Oh, sorry, the summer break can quickly come to an end. Summer itself, I don't feel like it's barely even started, apart from a few days heat wave a few weeks back. And since then, we've had thunderstorms and rain and cloud and a very muggy sort of heat. So, summer can
Yeah,
stay
it's
when it decides to arrive, but the summer break for football can definitely cease. And while we're now about 9-10 days away from the start of the Football League season, I'm very excited
we're
for
very
the
nearly there.
optimism there. So, yeah, it's certainly an interesting one. And since the last podcast with Ruben and Sam, there has been no end of changes on and off the pitch again, or probably more so off the pitch in the last sort of 10 days, 2 weeks. So I think we'll dive right into it. Preston Johnson's left Crawley Town for, I think, the third time, if I'm not mistaken. Will it be third time? I'm not going to say lucky, because that's quite harsh, but is it going to be? Is it the third and final time
I
he
know what you
leaves, do you think?
mean. I think so. I think this seems quite permanent. This seems quite. It's almost like there was always that sort of toxic couple that were always like on and off, on and off. It seems like this is finally he's very much distanced himself from the club going forward. I think in his statement, that's the impression I got. It felt much more final. There was always
Well,
you could
it felt
always say,
critical, didn't it? It was very
yeah,
critical, almost. I
that's
think
what I
is the
mean. I think
word.
there's a
It's very quite a shock.
couple of bridges burnt there. I would say, and obviously we don't know the ins and outs of what happens at the club in terms of the transfer policy, but that was the bit that he wasn't too happy with. It seemed.
Do
I
you, to cut in there? Do you think it's clever wording on his part in terms of how his statement seems to be very much what he thinks best for Crawley Town, or do you think it's just what was laid on the table to him wasn't best for Preston Johnson?
I wonder how much of a choice he really had.
Okay.
Because this has been rumoured for a while. I think you've seen a lot of tweets towards the back end of last season, sort of around the time that Scott was reappointed as manager, and in the last few weeks of the season, there was a lot of talk about new ownership. This 1896 thing, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
There's a couple of cryptic tweets from people who seem to have some sort of insight into some aspects of the club. So that was it wasn't a huge shock. I think to anyone who'd kind of seen something, some of the stuff that was said at the end of the season or in the last few weeks of the season. In a way, I'm surprised it took this long, just because of that, and it almost seemed like, oh, maybe he is staying on. I think there was an expectation that it would have happened perhaps in the aftermath of last season. Sort of the fact that it's happened kind of a couple of weeks before the season starts is slightly odd timing. Whether and again, to be honest, whether he's actually had much to do with the club over the last couple of months. Anyway, this could just be something that happened a couple of months ago, only being announced now. It wouldn't surprise me with how
It doesn't
our
surprise
comms tend
me.
to be.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't surprise me with how decisions do tend to come at the at unusual times for this ownership group when it comes to us and stuff. So apart from when they fire sale players immediately after a season ends, but obviously, Preston's stepped away. He obviously came out through himself publicly announcing it first via X before the club put out the way I read the statement from the club. It was a very unusual statement.
It was quite defensive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it didn't really feel like a thanks and gratitude type thing, did it?
No.
It was more just like, Preston's left, this is who's coming, these are who's taking over, and Preston's gone again. See ya.
Yeah,
It's a very unusual, very unusual statement.
it felt like I'm not convinced it was written by the social media or the comms team at the club.
Yeah.
It felt very much written by someone higher up. I think that I got that tone just because it was quite defensive and it was quite. It felt the way it said, it talks about the approach to transfers, which Preston has sort of mentioned as the main as a significant factor in him wanting to step aside because he didn't feel like he could work with that approach. Kind of in a weird way mirroring perhaps why Scott left 18 months ago or whenever it was now. So there's a certain weird parallel there, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I think it's interesting to see how this will affect the club going forward. There's obviously one thing that's come out over the summer when the accounts were filed, the best part of £9 million in debt to WAGMI, which is significant. I simply don't know how a club our size can ever afford to pay that off or make even a significant dent in that. To be honest, that is something that in the long term concerns me. I don't know. I don't even know how we've managed to rack up that level of expenditure in the first place. I know under the previous owners we were losing maybe 1 million a year or so, one to 1.2 million a year, which is obviously still quite significant. But in the space of 3 seasons to rack up that much debt is quite alarming.
Well, let's not forget Benjamin Tanamu cost the best part of £1 million apparently. So
depends which currency conversion you believe. I'm still not entirely convinced that. Well, I don't think we'll ever know the truth.
It's obviously interesting. Preston obviously stated about the wasn't confident in the transfer model. It was apparent, or it was sort of quite public, that it was maybe Ryan Gilbert or other people who were really keen to get Scott back after the Milton Keynes debacle. So you wonder whether that was the sort of beginning of the straw that broke the camel's back. How much of that Preston had a say in, wanted Scott back, thought it was the right choice, who knows. So, and then obviously we've gone on to make multiple signings, which we will come on to shortly. So we've touched on Preston's left, we've touched on sort of how it was released. But so looking in 5 years' time, what are we looking back at Preston Johnson as chairman of Crawley Town? What's his legacy going to be? And that's a pretty loaded question when he's left 5 days ago and he's been a relatively divisive figure. Some of it through, a lot of it probably through his own doing, I think, through whether it be online spats, whether it be silly comments in fan forums. So, yeah, where do you think people will look back at Preston and say, what's his overall arc going to be as a character when people look back on it? Or does it depend on what happens in the next 12 months with if the new ownership guys come in, we suddenly win 46 out 46 league games and Preston's not here? Is it a case of, well, he was a fellow who got us, played a part in getting us promoted, but look at this, we've just got to romp the league? Or if it goes the other way and we're sitting at the bottom end of the table, is it a case of everyone going, maybe Preston had a point during that statement that actually the transfer model wasn't going to work? Do you think it's going to be based on what the outcomes are of the next sort of 12, 18 months?
Yeah, I think that definitely has. That definitely will help paint a narrative. I think right now, if you ask people right now, there's a lot of people. There's a certain section, maybe not a lot, but there's a certain section of the fan base that'll be glad to see him gone. I think there are certain people who perhaps were maybe more balanced about it, if that's the right word. I don't want to paint any view as right or wrong, but perhaps these people had a view that they acknowledged he was quite divisive and he could be quite. Maybe he could shoot himself in the foot, and I think the ownership group as a whole would shoot themselves in the foot quite a lot. But there were some good things that were done under his chairmanship, if that's the right word. obviously the promotion season was fantastic, and I think I've said before that doesn't happen without the data model. That doesn't happen without you can't. I think you can criticise Wagamie for the season before, where we nearly got relegated, and you can criticise them for some of the things that happened over the last year with players going out and the ultimate relegation from League One, ultimately. But if you're going to do that, you kind of have to also give them some credit for putting us in a position where we could get promoted from League Two via the playoffs and have such a great season that we all, will all remember fondly for the rest of our lives. So, in that sense, I think it's probably a mixed kind of a mixed legacy, to use your word. There was obviously a lot of silly off the pitch stuff that was really avoidable. The whole Carol Bates debacle, I think is probably the best way to put it, which was entirely avoidable. The YouTubers signing for the club, the certain things that just, and I think he did learn from some of it, but often I got the impression that Preston was very much a his way or the highway kind of guy.
I think he definitely was more. He certainly wasn't a character who maybe I don't want to say didn't use his brain, because that's not fair to say. What I'm trying to get at is he was very emotive, maybe in some of his decision making, and
I think that's fair.
Didn't maybe step back and appreciate either other points of view. Maybe it was a narrow-minded thing. I don't know. I think he was definitely a fair way of displaying it was he was just very emotive in maybe his decision making, i.e. Carol Bates, i.e. fans forum answers and stuff like that. So
I would say that's fair, and I think kind of linked to that is perhaps his biggest failing, and this maybe feels a bit harsh because Preston perhaps doesn't have the right of reply immediately with us saying this, but I think his biggest failing was perhaps he failed to listen to other people. He did think he knew. I think I got the impression that between him and Eben as an ownership or as co-chairman, however you want to put it, it was very much that they knew best and they were going to do whatever they wanted to do, regardless of whether it was, regardless of whether perhaps more experienced football people would have advised them differently. Because and I think that was deliberate because they wanted to do things differently. They didn't want to be, they came in and they said their very ethos was that the current football model is broken. We need to do things differently, and we're going to do things differently. And they failed to make that work ultimately. So in that sense, I think they will look back, perhaps with a hint of regret that they didn't get that right, and perhaps we should be glad they didn't get that right because the club perhaps would be unrecognisable if they had. I think it's a mixed bag. I think I can't help but be grateful for the promotion season because that was honestly one of the best seasons of my life. Wembley was the best day of my life, and I think a lot of us would say similar. But I think it got to the point where perhaps the relationship was damaged beyond repair with a not insignificant part of the fan base. And if it means that we get a bit more stability in terms of the ownership, because it always felt quite volatile. It always felt like it always just felt like there was something about to happen. I've often said, one normal week of Crawley. That's all I ask for. And it was almost like there was always something going on. There was always, even when things were going well, you're almost waiting for the next ridiculous bit of news to come out about Crawley, like there was 4 or 5 incidents last season, or 4 or 5 stories in the news alongside what happened with Carroll, where it's just like, why can't we just be a normal club? Why can't we just not have any of this nonsense? And so, in a way, I think a lot of people will be looking forward to perhaps a bit more stability and a bit more normality. Whether that will happen under the new leadership, who are still Wagamie, still the Wagamie group, still people who are associated with Wagamie, but it'd be nice. I think that's one thing that I'm a little bit uncertain. It'd be nice to know more about them, where their money is coming from, how they intend to take the club forward.
Sure. And was going to be one of my questions was, are we going to see a united Crawley going forward? And I guess only time will tell. Now, Obviously,
Yeah.
we've now had confirmation that the three new sort of lead investors, I think, is how they've been described, as Daniel Killilly, Ryan Gilbert, and Maxwell Stroman. Obviously, we were aware that the Killilly brothers had been involved with the club for a number of months. I think maybe from the beginning of this year or even last season, beginning
I
of
think
the
about,
season.
possibly last season or
Ryan
even,
Gilbert is
yeah.
a name who I think has been in the peripheral for people for a long time, long standing with WAGMI, but a much more recent time has sort of elevated and um, got to the, sort of more of the forefront and become a bit more of a figure. Certainly around the time that Scott Lindsay returned, which sort of maybe marries up with that. And then Maxwell Stroman, who I can find absolutely nothing about. I have no idea who he is, what he looks like, and what he does. So that's going to be an interesting one because
Yeah.
that again, he could be the smartest man in the room, but equally he could be anyone else in the last 2-3 years who have run Crawley Town, whether that be Preston Eben or Ben Levin, who we just don't know. So it'll be interesting how these three names come together and what their vision is for the club and what they see is working that hadn't worked in the last couple of years, even though we had seen a promotion out of it. So yes, we will see. So on that then, are you positive? Are you negative? Or are you at the moment indifferent about the takeover? I say takeover. Takeover. We'll use it loosely. It's not a
Yeah.
takeover as such. It's just new
Um, just the
people
changing of the guard, really,
heading
isn't
it.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm. I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm neutral. I'd say I'm kind of a bit wary, just because we simply don't know who these people are. The financial situation is in the long term looking pretty difficult. I mentioned the debt earlier.
Hmm.
I think it doesn't. I'm not reassured. I think there's a lot of work to do from this new leadership group, the new chairman, however you want to put it, lead investors.
Interesting.
And so I'd like to see one. Well, I think one thing that we've spoken
Hmm.
about a lot, and it's been an issue amongst the wider fan base over the last 3 years, is the lack of transparency at times. And then when there has been transparency, it's not always been followed up by actions. I think that's something that's aggravated a lot of people. It's certainly been a concern for us, and so I think that would be a good place to start. If I could, if any of the new owners or the new ownership group or new chairman are listening, um, unlikely, but they may well be. That's kind of one thing that I think would be really welcome. Is just honest, um, transparent communication backs up by actions. I think there's some positive signs over the summer, in terms of development around the ground. The stadium's been touched up with a lick of paint, which looks good, and it
Hmm.
looks like development of a new away fan zone, which is something that had been talked about previously, and is now looks like it's underway in terms of its development, and that'll be really positive, a positive experience for away fans coming here, and it's obviously good to get more money in.
New club
Um,
shop as well, or
New club
redesigned
shop
club
looks
shop.
brilliant. Yeah, online club shop as well. So there's lots of positive off the field changes. I think which perhaps point to a more focused, a more you know what's the word, disciplined or driven kind of approach off the pitch in terms of just getting things done and modernising certain things. Online club shop, the club shop. Touching up the stadium. These are all things that they're small things, but they make a huge difference to how the club's perceived and the general experience as a fan. And it seems like that's really been prioritised this summer as this ownership change has been going on. So that's a positive start. But I think some
Hmm.
visibility is needed to clear things up and just to reassure people, I think.
I certainly have been wondering though, and I'd love to ask whoever made this decision why they painted the fascia of the stadium that colour. I think it looks nice. I don't know. I have no
Yeah,
issue with it.
I did
I
read
thought
someone
maybe they just
saying,
paint it red, or like why they've gone for this
oh,
sort of navy grey. I don't know what colour it is really.
I saw someone saying it's because it's longer lasting. Like they did consider going red again, but it just would have peeled off in a few years and would have ended up in the same state. Whereas the colour they've gone for is maybe like longer lasting. It's harder wearing under the sun and the rain and all the elements. I think that's the explanation I read in a Facebook comment on the Facebook group. So
okay. What we will do is now we've touched on. I should say, I think as well that I believe the CTSA have actually been in contact with Ryan for a little while, and I hope that things are going to be. We can look and say this is going to be sort of the start of a new dawn, and hopefully there'll be a lot more frequent contacts. So Ruben, the chair of the CTSA, I believe, has sort of been in talks more so than anyone, and hopefully it will lead to positive things. So we'll unfortunately time will tell, but fingers crossed that we get off to a good start in the league, and that will ease any pressures that already exist. But also then it will allow for a better line of communication because obviously that has not been there for some time. Let's move on now. We've touched on Preston. He's out the door, whether he was booted out or he walked out of his own accord. We've touched on the new ownership. I keep calling them the new ownership. The new chairman, lead investors, whatever their titles are, who hopefully in the coming weeks we will understand a bit more of and understand who they are as people. Let's go on to the people who are now going to be on the pitch for us next season. So we've, in the last couple of weeks, had a fair few more confirmed as going out, and I'm going to try not to dwell on some of them too long because I'm pretty sure that both Ruben and Sam touched on it last time out. But using the famed transfer market, it says Tyrese John Jules has left the club. It says Rory Feely, who we know has left to Cork, and Benjamin Tenenu has also left. The strangest transfer in Crawley Town history, as far as I'm
do you think we'll ever get the full story on that?
I would love to know. Both the chairman who were at the club when it happened are no longer at the club. So unless one of them wants to write a tell-all book, which I think would actually be a popular seller in Crawley, to be fair, to give their opinion, then they might sell a couple of thousand copies. Will Swan has obviously gone up a league to Bradford. Wow. Armando off to Wickham. Rushford Hepburn Murphy to MK Dons. Of course, he's gone to MK Dons, which is just absolutely ludicrous. Toby Malarkey's gone back up north to Fleetwood. Panucci Kamara off to Dundee, and we'll be playing, I think, is it Europa Conference League this next season?
I believe so, yeah. European football of some sort.
European football.
Fair play to him.
Although, so will Crawley, because we're off to Swansea in the Carabao Cup third round. So, there we go. Jasper Sheikh has gone up to South Shields and Sunnyfish to Torquay. There sounds like quite a lot of outgoings, probably not as many as last season. But
you're missing a big one there.
Season.
Not to our sweet Prince Jeremy Kelly. Our American.
Oh, that's an interesting one. He is not listed on transfer market yet. Yeah,
the best player in the world.
Out the back of my mind. Yeah, well, not anymore. He's not. He's gone. He's not anymore.
Yeah.
No,
we'll miss him.
Oh, yeah, that's a real shame. That's a real shame. Incoming though, let's talk about the future. Incoming, we had Reece Brown. I think was probably our first summer signing. I can't remember who he played for last season. I don't know if it was League Two team or National League.
I think he was a free agent last season because I remember he was on trial with us. Yeah, he'd been at Forest Green the season before. Forest
Green is what I remember him from, yeah.
Yeah, and then you had a season out with the game, basically, training.
Our oldest signing of the summer, 29 years old. We've got Harvey Davis on loan from Liverpool, a goalkeeper much needed. We obviously had about 18 different goalkeepers last season, so hopefully he won't pick up any career-threatening injuries, as any other keeper who stood between the goalposts at Crawley seems to get. Jay Williams has returned. Oh my goodness, who saw this coming? That is unfathomable how this is full circle. Louie Flower from Brighton, Danny Cashman, highly rated in our neck of the woods from Worthing, Harry McCurdy from Bromley, 28 years old, Kabongo Shimanga, who I hope I haven't butchered his name, but my God,
I think that's right.
I was really excited when we got him over the line. When I saw that, I thought, what is going on there? Because I think that could be a very positive signing, in my opinion. Dion Pereira, from Luton, I believe, was a free agent. He's not a loan, is he? That was a
No,
free agent,
permanent.
I think.
Yeah, permanent.
And Kyle Scott from Orange County. So have we got the second coming of Jeremy Kelly? Who knows? So, what do you rate our window so far?
Um,
Without look, we've been very unlucky. We haven't been able to see many games outside of the Three Bridges one, of which I don't know how many of these played. Obviously, Cole Scott, I don't think played
yeah, I
that
don't
day.
think he was signed by that point. No.
Um, but yeah, so it's hard to gauge off almost no seeing nothing. But of the players alone, what are you giving the summer window to date?
Um, it's a really tough one because again, I think the nature of our the sort of size of club we are and the budget we are, we're not going to be signing players like Will Collar, who's gone to MK Dons, or Aaron Collins, who's signed for MK Dons from Bolton for like the best part of £1 million. Like we're not going to be fishing in that pond, so to speak. So you always kind of have to, we are going to have to pick up these slightly unfancied or out of favour players, or players who've gone under the radar. So, for example, Harry McCurdy, and try and kind of in the same way that we did a couple of years ago, try and pick up these diamonds in the rough almost and polish them up a little bit. And I think in that sense, I'm okay with it because 2 years ago it worked for us, and Scott really got a tune out of most of those players back then.
Mm.
So if there's anyone who I would want to be kind of picking these players and getting them through a season and getting the best out of them, it would be Scott. And there's a couple of them that I really like. I like the signing of Dion Pereira, kind of a tricky winger, kind of in that Armando mould. Looks like he's got a turn of pace and can carry the ball nicely and beat his man. Kyle Scott was someone who I'm absolutely sure we nearly signed last summer. We were heavily linked with him. I remember the name.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
I remember seeing this, or maybe it was January, but it was fairly recently. The name rang a bell, and it was. I think it was a sign that just didn't go through for whatever reason. We've obviously got him now, so he's someone who we obviously had our eye on for a long time, which kind of bodes well. I think that
mm.
that that's
Well,
that, that's that's
Scott
me a
was here
positive sign.
last summer as well. Scott was here last summer,
Yeah,
so you wonder. Well, you don't know. You assume the fact he's come this summer and there was links last summer was that Scott must
yeah,
have been keen on him.
and
So
we know Scott's kind of got more or the final say or more of a say in transfers, and it's very much going to be players that he really wants at the club, which is obviously a positive on his side. Um, yeah, again, Shamanga, he's someone who scored bags of goals at National League level. Hasn't quite clicked for him in the Football League, but if we can get the best out of him, he could be someone. Could he be another Orsi? Could he be someone who clicks and is scoring 15, 20 goals a season?
I'm
Louis Flout
excited for him.
Louis
I'm
Flout seems
really
like he could
excited.
be a bit of a surprise package. He's played really well in pre-season, chipping in with quite a few
Mm.
goals and assists, which is obviously really positive. Obviously, the standard of opposition hasn't necessarily been what he's going to be facing at League Two level, but it's positive that he's kind of coming in and hit the ground running. And it's a lot of unknowns. Every transfer is a gamble, but it's a lot of unknowns, and it's going to be hard to assess them until we're a few games in and we kind of got a better idea of the pecking order. Who's going to be starting in midfield. We know Jay's probably going to be starting. That's obviously a big one for us, bringing him back. We know that if he's fit, he starts under Scott, and then it's a
Yep.
question of who starts with him in midfield, where we've got quite a lot of bodies. So I think you asked about, is there anywhere that I think we could strengthen? I still wouldn't mind seeing another wide player. I know we've got Cashman who's been playing out wide. McCurdy can play out wide. Pereira's obviously a wide player, but we also got Forster and Adiemo as well. But I wouldn't mind just seeing one more body, particularly because Forster and Adiemo's injury records aren't the best, especially
Yep.
Forster. So if I looked at the squad right now, I'm pretty comfortable with it. I think we'll be absolutely fine. I'm not blown away by it, but none of us were blown away by the signings a couple of years ago, and look where we ended up.
Yeah.
So where one area where I'm quite happy is with the defence. Keeping Josh Flint, Touchwood, is an absolute.
Yeah.
He's far too good for League Two. It's an absolute joke if he's playing League Two football this season. I've said it before. Dion
Maybe
Conroy, we know
that
he's a good League Two.
that half a season injury though could have
Yeah, could be.
put Lucas off. Who knows?
I think I imagine it probably did. Yeah. Again, Josh, there's perhaps questions over his fitness because he was kind of out injured for a lot of last season. missed a few games at the end of the season as well with a couple of injuries. So
But when he does play,
whether you can get him to play 35, 40 games in a season, there's maybe questions over that.
but when he
Um,
does play, though, he is one
it,
of the best defenders I've seen in a red shirt. I
yeah,
think. I think
I
he's
think
been
he's when he's
phenomenal.
fit, he's probably the best defender in League Two. I'm going
Yeah,
to go out there and say he's just that good. Dion, we know he's a good League Two level defender, obviously very comfortable in the middle of the defence. And then you've got Charlie Barker and Ben Radcliffe, and obviously Joey McCain a very good backup as well at this level. So defensively, I'm pretty comfortable with our options. I'd like to. If you always want a bit more firepower, you always want that. Maybe it's just too many years of playing Football Manager, but I'm always kind of thinking, could we get another striker in, or could we get a winger who can make a bit of a difference? I like our midfield options as well. I think our midfield options are probably quite strong. I like the idea of Louie Watson in League Two. Flashes of
yeah.
what we saw of him in League One last season. Again, questions over his fitness. I think that is the big concern for me. There's questions over a few of these players' fitness, and we don't have the best injury record as a club.
That's
So
why they're called Crawley Town, though, isn't it? Ultimately,
yeah,
because
yeah,
we are offering chances that they are maybe not getting at other clubs because we have to take the risk on them, and it paid off the year we got promoted. It wasn't, it paid off a bit last season in terms of Hepburn Murphy was. We signed him, and I just remember every comment was, "Yeah, you'll enjoy watching him on the injury table, on the treatment table, blah blah blah." He was fit most of the season. He wasn't really out injured.
he had a couple of injuries. I remember he did his hamstring at one point, and he had a couple of. But he was, yeah, he wasn't the worst offender in terms
Yeah,
of trips to the treatment room.
and I would say a lot of injuries didn't feel like they were. They weren't injuries that were caused through like I think a lot of injuries felt like they were done through like secondary movements or just we were just a bit unlucky with them. So I'm hoping that actually, apart from the goalkeeper situation, which I think will go down in folklore in Crawley Town history, more so than being relegated from League One last season, was the number of goalkeepers. How we had more goalkeepers than
It's
points last season. It
be
felt
a
like
great pub quiz question in a few years.
it really will be. Yeah, can you name them all? How many were there? Can you name them all? What was the cumulative time spent in? Just mental. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you in that it feels like we have signed obviously quite a vast attacking talent. That seems to have been the way we've gone this season, and it's no secret that last season, sorry, not last season, the season before was much more about we'll score more than you, more so
Mm.
than being that solid at the back. Obviously, we were quite lucky that we actually were relatively solid, but I think goals were the reason that we got. It wasn't. They say goals win games and defence win championships, but we certainly. I think our goal difference. Oh, sorry, our goals conceded was one of the highest in the league when we got promoted from League Two. It wasn't a good
Yeah,
defensive record that
it really
season.
wasn't.
Next to no clean sheets, and yeah, so I think that's something which has almost been looked at again as, albeit I think maybe we have got better defenders than we did this time 2 years ago. It's going to be interesting to see if that has changed at all. Scott will play the same way as we've seen him play in two and a half of the last 3 years, however long he's been at the club, minus that brief hiatus he took to go on holiday to Bedfordshire. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and only one goalkeeper through the door, but Ryan Sanford now probably fit again as well. So we have got three goalkeepers this season.
Yeah,
With Jojo
I
Wallacott, I assume also not going anywhere.
yeah that's one thing that surprised me. I did expect Jojo to go because he wasn't going to be first choice this season. Harvey Davies has been brought in to be number one. That's pretty clear. So if you're Jojo, are you just waiting for the goalkeeper gloves to be available again? If because that's one area that still concerns me. We brought in a goalkeeper who Crew fans didn't seem to think too highly of, and I don't always like using that as a barometer of how successful his signing's going to be. We brought in Liam Kelly 2 years ago, and Rochdale fans were laughing at us, and he's turned out to be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
Same with someone like Russian Hepburn Murphy who scored double figures for us last season, or we could go on.
yeah.
It's not
Irish
always
Joe
the
Jules as well.
yeah,
Fantastic.
exactly. It's like there's
Sorry,
it's not
sorry.
always it's not always the best way to kind of get an opinion on a signing, even though it's completely natural. You see fans going, "Oh, what's it like for you?" Or I think I kind of trust Scott's judgment, and I trust his ability to get the best out of the players that he's got. And I think perhaps the fact that he isn't working with the most talented team in the league, or the we're not going to be favourites for promotion. Perhaps that works in his favour, because I feel like that's one of the issues at MK Dons. He went in and it was expected that he'd turn them into a top 3, top 4 side, and briefly he did, and then it all went wrong. I just wonder if that little bit of that underdog mentality, that little bit of that, we're not the biggest club, we haven't got the biggest resources, but we're going to go out there and we're going to give you a bloody nose. I think that suits him. I think that
it does.
That suits his style more psychologically than tactically, because I don't think tactically much changes with Scott, but.
And that's fine though. It works. It works for us as a club. I think it's a match made in heaven. Clearly, we saw that even when he came back last season. We saw it against who was his first game? Bristol Rovers, I think.
Bristol Rovers,
1-0.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a pretty game.
We battered them first half. Yeah, we were excellent.
We did batter. It was a bit of a backs to the wall at certain points, but equally we did. I think it was like one of those games where we'd come off the back of not scoring goals as we didn't do last season. Obviously, we only won, I think, 1-0, but again, I think we had multiple chances in the game still, and it was just like a breath of fresh air.
That might be the only game we've ever won 1-0 under Scott, thinking about it. Actually, no, tell a lie. There's been a couple of others, but it's not a scoreline we associate with him, put it that way.
No. But, and then we've obviously had I think we won our first 2 or 3 under Scott, didn't we? And then we were like, bloody hell, we're staying up. And then obviously we had a bit of a poor run, a bit of bad luck, and then we ended the season with what was the final home game where we effectively got relegated?
Northampton. Northampton 3-0.
We actually
was it
3-0? It was unlike anything.
It was almost like a pre-season. That second half.
8 or 9-0 that game. It was absolutely mental. Yeah. So that's the sort of things where we know we've got this. There isn't a lot of unknown, I don't think, going into this season.
Yeah, in that sense, you're right.
We the new players because we know what to. We haven't just had a manager come in for 6 weeks before the end of the season and not know what he's about. This guy got us out of League 2 before and kept us up in League 2 the season before that. So, fingers crossed we're going to see what we saw 2 seasons ago.
I think you're right to bring that up. The fact that we finished last season pretty strongly. We were effectively a mid-table League 1 team under Scott when he came in for those last, 12 games? 10, 12 games?
Yes, it was about 12 games.
So we were effectively, and if you're a mid-table League 1 club, you're one of the best teams in League 2. So in that sense, I can understand where the expectation comes from. I just, perhaps I'm naturally pessimistic. I don't know. I think we'll be absolutely fine. I'd be surprised if we finished below mid-table. But I think there's a lot of strong teams in League 2, and wouldn't be surprised if we are. I think there's a lot of, for the first time under Scott, there's almost an expectation, like we're actually a really good team, and we're going to be, we're going to be top 3, top 4, and it's like, hold on a minute, obviously there wasn't that expectation a couple of years ago. There wasn't much expectation last season. It was just let's hope we stay up. This season suddenly, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he deals with that, and how he kind of manages those expectations from the fans, especially if we start well. Obviously, want to start well, want to win the first 2-3 games.
The good thing is it's Scott Lindsay. He's effectively God in these parts, right? He can almost do no wrong. He can walk on water. He can turn water to wine. That's how highly he is thought of at Crawley Town Football Club. It's just a matter of fact he is. So he will have almost it's not a case of we got relegated from League 1, we're expected to go and win League 2 just because we were in League 1 last season and we have Scott Lindsay. If we start poorly, do you think there'll be an element of Scott Lindsay will turn it around? No, don't worry about it. Let's all remain calm. Frustrating, sure, when you lose, everyone gets frustrated. But look at the bigger picture. We've got Scott Lindsay. We know will come good. Do you think we'll have that grace period where actually it's not going to matter? The first 5 games, if we lose 3 of them, sure, will we be really disappointed? Of course we will. Will it be the be all and end all? No, because we know we could probably somehow turn it around and go and win 6 of the next 7 if all goes well. So I think there'll be an element where Scott will not feel as I don't say not as much pressure because I think he puts a lot of pressure on himself. But I think there's it's not going to be like a scenario of MK Dons or Swindon before that for him where there is that expectation and fans will get on his back when things aren't going right, because I think we've shown that if anyone can do no wrong, it's Scott Lindsay almost. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think there'll be. I think he'll have a lot of credit in the bank, so to speak. There'll be a lot of goodwill, and if if we don't have an amazing start, people go, well, do you know what? It's only the first 5, 6 games, whatever. That doesn't define your season. There's been plenty of teams who have had slightly dodgy starts and gone on to get promoted. You look at, for example, Bradford last season, or even Walsall, who had an incredible first half of the season and didn't get promoted. There's always one team that doesn't start that well and ends up taking everyone by surprise. I mean, a couple of years ago, I think we were second after 10 games, and it was like, bloody hell, what's going on here? And so obviously, if we're second after 10 games, there's going to be I think the expectation will be really heightened in that case, because we'll be like, okay, well, this is the standard now. It's maybe a double-edged sword in that sense. If we start really well, that kind of expectation, or I think it's more hope at the moment than expectation. I think if we are 7th going into Christmas, for example, I think everyone will be pretty happy.
Yeah,
or even if we're just outside the block, because it's not a bad position to be in. And equally, and it might even be better in that sense, because it takes a bit of pressure off the team. Say we're top 3 going into Christmas, then suddenly it's like, oh, this is real now. We're in a real scrap for promotion, and you almost can't enjoy it as much as if you're doing the chasing like we were in that promotion season a couple of years ago. That's almost more enjoyable. There's less pressure. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more. Let's just try and win as many games as possible and see what happens. So if you're second or third, you've got people chasing you. You're the one under pressure, and it's a different kind of pressure, and it'll be really interesting to see. And we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but if we do end up in that situation, it'll be really interesting to see how we handle it. But
I think it's safe to say we're not going to be. I don't think we'll be bookies' favourite to go down like we have been before. So it'd be nice for probably the first time under Wagme that we're not tipped for relegation in a season. Is probably quite nice, actually.
Yeah, I think we'll be absolutely fine. Yeah,
it's quite interesting you say that. We obviously saw it the season we did go up. We saw when we got into those playoff positions, we faltered. We faltered against Doncaster, who admittedly were, I think, in the early stages, but they might have been like game 6 or 7 of that ridiculous run of wins they went on when they won about 18 games in a row. We lost the Colchester game as well. We lost silly games. We dropped silly points to. I don't know if we drew with Northampton or we drew with like Barrow. I don't know if it was Barrow, although Barrow were obviously in the playoffs at the time. And we struggled. But then when we were doing the chasing, pressure was off. We went away to Tranmere. We went away to Mansfield, away to Newport. We scored 3 or 4 goals at each of those grounds. We came home and drew against Stockport in a game we probably should have won when they were flying high towards the top of the league. So when we're chasing, it's always been better for us. And that has led on quite nicely to a question I was going to ask of, so next season, in your opinion, are we looking up or are we looking over our shoulder?
I think we're looking up, for sure. I think I'm maybe a little bit less bullish than some other fans who are like, oh yeah, we've got Scott back, we've got Jay Williams back, we're going up. I'm perfectly happy to get pretty excited, and I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic purely because I think we'll maybe surprise a few people. I don't think anyone, like you said, I don't think anyone will have us going down or worrying about relegation. But I think it would be possibly a surprise package. But it's I think kind of going back to what I touched on about the squad building and the transfers. It's we haven't got a team of like superstars at this level. You look at like an MK Dons or a Chesterfield or even a Barnet who've got like really strong teams for this level, and obviously Barnet will be up there because teams that win the National League, especially with 100 odd points, they tend to be right up there in League Two. So it's good. I think that's where I'm a little bit like tempering my expectations, because I think it's going to be really competitive at the top of League Two. It's going to be really strong League Two, unlike last season. And
Yeah.
I think there's also, I often think a Scott Lindsay team probably isn't, and I don't mean this in a hypercritical way, but a Scott Lindsay team probably isn't good enough defensively to be right at the top of the table. That probably limits us. That probably limits the ceiling of what we can achieve in a way. And I wouldn't be surprised if we end up in the playoffs. I would not be at all surprised. Like if you gave me a quid or you gave me a fiver and said, right, go to the bookie, stick that on where you think we'll finish, I'd probably say playoffs. Like,
You
if
heard it
you
here
really
first,
gun to
ladies
my
and
head,
gents.
but equally, I wouldn't be like massively shocked if we are just a solid top half of the table side, like finishing 9th, 10th. I think it's just such a competitive league this year. I could be wrong. I'm always wrong. So, take that as you will. Don't start placing any bets because of what I said. And gamble
Well,
responsibly, of course.
that's it leads us on to. We'll move on from that. We've touched on the transfers now, and I'm sure there'll still be plenty of new faces to come in over the coming weeks. But the squad's taking shape quite nicely, and it's quite nice to see a lot of the better players from last season still at the club. In all fairness, we look at Max Anderson and Charlie Barker and Josh Flint. So that's great. Let's now move on to the fact that the club have now released the home shirt for next season earlier this week, or last week, I should say.
What a beauty.
Now, there was a lot of the away shirt came off really popular. My only critique of it would be that I think Reef should be in red, but that's just me because it's just a nice red and white shirt. So if the Reef sponsor was in red, I think it would have complemented it really well. Now, the guys I think touched on that last time. I'm more focusing now on the home shirt in what might be. I mean, look, it's obviously based off the 0304, 0304, yeah,
Yeah.
double winning season where we got into the conference for the first time. Now, it's obviously based on that. Where does this rank in all-time kits? Just based off design, obviously not taking into account what other kits might bring as memories. But in terms of the design, where do you, at initial instance, take this kit?
Nostalgia aside, which is obviously hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, nostalgia aside, which is obviously hard because it obviously evokes that 0304 kit so strongly. It's almost a mirror image. It's just a really nice kit. I like the collar. I always love a collar on a kit, and it looks like a proper Crawley kit. It's a different shade of red to last season, like a lighter shade of red, which I always prefer. I think that that sort of like dark red doesn't feel very Crawley compared to, if you look at a lot of our kits down the years, a lot of them have been, especially the successful ones. If you think about the season we got promoted from the conference, that was a kind of a similar colour to what we got this season. I know it's like, kind of obsessing over fine details, but I do think it suits us more, and it's just a really lovely kit. Like even the shorts, the socks, like the details, the trim on the socks and the shorts. It's probably a 9 out of 10. I'd say there's not much wrong with it. I just can't give it a 10 because that means a 10 out of 10 always means you can't improve, and I'm sure there's things that you could improve about it. But
I think a 9 out of 10 is pretty fair. It's probably our first kit, albeit there is. I don't know what to describe it as, like a print down the side on the white of the Devil's Trident, which has sort of become synonymous in the last 12 months with almost like free sponsorship of the Devil's Lager or whatever the beer we've brought out's called. But it's probably the first shirt under Wagmew that hasn't had some sort of pattern imprinted on the design. Pretty much, it's just almost like a plain red shirt. And I think it looks beautiful. I think it's great. Hopefully, I've not seen it in person yet. Hopefully, it's sort of the badge isn't a sticker like it was in the Adidas days, and hopefully, it's sort of a bit of a nicer design. And whether that's a heat seal or a stitched one would be nice. I think £50 as well is a really decent price. I'm not going to grumble too much at that in a day where you can get football teams charging over £120 for shirts, or even a normal sort of, I don't know what it's called, like a stadium shirt costing upwards of 70, 80 quid. Like, I get it, lead to Crawley there, but it's still £50 for a club likely that needs it more than what, say, Man U are going to draw in shirt revenue where they don't need to charge £90 a shirt. I think £50 are a pretty decent place, and I don't think we've seen too much increase in that over the last couple of years. So kudos for that, for being at a decent price.
It seems pretty fair.
I would just say the neckline for me, I love a collar. I think the collar's phenomenal. I think the shoulders are phenomenal. Apologies if anyone is just tuning in and thinks they're listening to a Crawley Town podcast and not an episode of Grand Designs or Gok One's Catwalk show. But the neckline for me is, I'm not entirely sure on that. I'd like a slightly different neckline. I love the collar, but yeah, that's the only thing I'd change. That's the only reason I'd give it a 9 is probably because the sort of white neckline with the red bit across it, just a bit questionable for me at the moment.
Yeah,
maybe it'll well be in person.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that overall, I mean, the 03-04 kit was my first ever Crawley kit, and I would have been 5 years old that season, 5-6 years old that season. So it's obviously quite there's a sentimental side to the fact that, yeah, I think particularly for people sort of my age, sort of fans, you know, in your late 20s, mid to late 20s or 30s, that was one of your earliest kits. That's one of your earliest memories, that season and that kit, and players like Andy Little or, you know, just that players of that vintage. I think it just, I mean, Andy Little was a goalkeeper, so he wouldn't even be wearing the outfield shirt, obviously, but he's the first name that pops into my head. But you know, sort of that team and sort of those, getting promoted at Western-super-Mare. Or sorry, at home, was it at home to Western-super-Mare? I can't even remember now. Also, I don't remember the season that well, but I think I remember the kit, and I remember the away kit as well. The away kit was white and black that season, so there's a similarity. Obviously, it's similarity there.
Yeah, but that kit didn't have Newbush and Langley Green and Broadfield.
No,
and
of course.
Downhill and Three Bridges strewn into the fabric. So here we go. No, I think everything else looks great as well in terms of the training gear. Again, they smashed out the park this season. I think that does look good. A few new additions in terms of you can buy a gilet and a player's jacket as well now. They're a bit more pricey, up at £90 for a jacket.
Yeah, 90 quid for the... I mean, it's a nice jacket.
I do like it. I don't know if I can stretch to that this season, unfortunately. But I do like it. And the player training red sweatshirt jumper, I think it's nicer than the black one we had last season as well. So yeah, I think again they've done really well. Kudos to the team for getting sort of a bespoke design made and not some Adidas trash template. Or being Swindon Town basically and having last season's hand-me-downs again.
I want to big up Area who, you know, they do treat us well. Like last season, this season they've given us something quite unique, and they've actually clearly put a lot of like care and attention into the details. So. Yeah, and like I say, it's much nicer than just a generic. Even though the Adidas kits were fine, like they were quite nice, but it's quite nice as a League Two club to kind of be getting something quite bespoke and something quite.
It's becoming a bit more of a thing now, I think, isn't it? As well, you look at, I think Grimsby are having stuff like Umbro. I think there's a lot more manufacturers now that aren't Nike and Adidas coming back into the game. I think there's that one who Burton have a really nice kit this season. Cambridge are doing wonders with Umbro.
Port Vale have got that retro style kit. Yeah,
there's some nice manufacturers out there who are really putting effort into it, and it's becoming a bit more of a fashion thing now, I think, as opposed to almost like the retro. It's almost like going back in time to the 90s where kits were bespoke left, right and centre. So yeah, that is phenomenal that we've got this, and this is probably the best set of kits we've had for a long time. And it's also the fact that the home and away kit are not the same template. I know it was bespoke last season, but the fact that they are different kits. Yes. The only thing that bugged me about the kits last season was the fact that they were the same template. They were bespoke templates, but they were still templates from each other. So I'm very, very glad that they are unique to each other in identity. So fantastic. Well done, Araya, and the guys behind the scenes for getting that signed off in ample time, and the fact they're on sale before the season starts. Before that would happen under Rugby. Now, let's end the pod this week with the pre-season roundup, because we are due our final pre-season game this Friday
evening against Palace at home.
I wasn't sure if I'm going to get to that. I will see if I can try. We started our pre-season exploits away at Three Bridges on the 8th of July, which seems like ages ago, but it was really about 2-3 weeks ago. Not even 3, it was 2 weeks ago. Where we won 5-0 away from home. Unfortunately, I didn't make it that evening. Did you go to that game, Louie?
I've not been to any of the pre-season games. Right. I don't tend to go to many of them, just because I try and save up all my energy for the season. And
I love pre-season friendlies, especially at lower league. I think I went to, was it Lewis at the stripping the Lewis game last year, one of our first pre-season friendly, where we had about 18 trialists playing that night. That was good fun that night. So nice to have some really local ones. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. We won 5-0 away at Three Bridges, who I don't have the scorers in front of me for. We then went away to East Grinstead 4 days later and won 5-1 there. The following Tuesday, we beat Dagenham and Redbridge 5-1. Andy Carroll's first foray into pre-season back in the UK after spending it in Bordeaux, the French fourth tier at that club. So quite the eye-opener for him. And I think there was a clip to his social media rounds of him getting bodied by potentially Charlie Barker or someone.
The idea that Andy Carroll, former Premier League striker Andy Carroll, is now acquainted with Charlie Barker and Josh Flynn,
pretty sure,
and Radcliffe, and like it just really makes me laugh.
It was sort of like a welcome to non-league Andy kind of thing, and he just
it's
tried to hold
fantastic.
his own and then got bodied off of it a little bit.
Also, Charlie Barker's not like the biggest centre back either. Andy Carroll is obviously massive.
I'm sure it was Charlie Barker. It was Charlie or Josh. I'm sure it was one of those two. And then we finally rounded off. No, we haven't actually. No, sorry, we played Portsmouth on Saturday in a game that was meant to be played at the Broadfield, but unfortunately the heavens opened and.
Let's take Noah's Ark down to the south coast.
Yeah, get out of the way now in July as opposed to through the season, like we have had the last few years. But we lost that 1-0 in a game that was played behind closed doors, I think, at Pompey's Training Complex. So kudos to them for getting the game on and at least getting 90 minutes in the players' legs. And then today, I'm going to go back to it, we played a Southampton 11 and we did end up in 2-1 defeat, although I think we won. When you see what sort of kit Southampton were wearing, it is potentially the most grotesque thing I've ever seen in my life. We took the lead courtesy of Jack Rolls in the 9th minute, and I believe, I'm not going to pronounce his name, but that is a phenomenal name. Prince Will, insert second name here, equalised before Harvey Davis. No, that's our goalkeeper, Harvey Davis. Before Southampton 11 basically won the game 2-1, scoring either side of half-time. I don't actually know who scored the winner for Southampton. So, look, you can never read too much in pre-season. Nice to see we scored a lot of goals because I don't think we did last season. If I'm not mistaken, we sort of, I think, struggled a little bit in pre-season. It'll be interesting to see how we play against Palace on Friday, because you expect that to be... you can imagine that being one of Scott's specialties, where he's probably made them train during the day and they'll probably play on tired legs or something similar to that, like he has done in the past when they play pre-season friendlies, because he wants to get their fitness up. We know that's a strong point of Scott's, unless he's going to give them days off, and they've already done that a couple of times over pre-season. So nice to see there's been a few goals. 3 times we've scored 5 goals. We've lost to higher league opposition a couple of times as well, and we're finishing it with the FA Cup winners on Friday.
European opposition, we can say.
European opposition, yeah.
Well, European,
League, what should be Europa League opposition.
Yeah,
but that's for a different podcast.
Scott seems to be pretty pleased with how the performances have been in pre-season. He was really pleased with the Portsmouth one, looking at watching his post-match comments. So it's you never know how much to read into pre-season. I remember under Kevin Betsy, we had a pretty decent pre-season, scoring quite a few goals, putting a good performance, and drew 2-2 at Hearts, I want to say. Yeah, and then we all know how that went in the end. The season we got promoted under Scott, we'd had a pretty poor pre-season from memory. Like we hadn't looked great, and then we obviously, had a great season. It kind of does. I don't think it. I think it's more about the performances and just getting minutes in the legs, and I think the fact that we've got the bulk of the squad in. Perhaps I think Scott said today he wants to get 1 or 2 more in, which sounds about right. I think the fact we've got the bulk of the squad in, getting some good minutes, putting in some good performances. I wonder if Scott knows what his strongest team looks like yet, because I always think that's a concern if you go into the season not really knowing, for example, like what your midfield's going to look like, and especially with our midfield options and the sort of the quality that we've got in midfield. If everyone's fit, there's going to be 1 or 2 really good players missing out. You kind of think, oh, that's harsh. Like, one of Max Anderson or Louie Watson's would miss out, or Brees Brown or Kyle Scott. He's
or Liam Fraser if he even signs.
Well, I've seen suggestions that he could be on his way to Reading. I think if he was going to sign,
Yeah,
we may
that
well
would
have.
surprise me.
Yeah, I did
Yeah,
see a Reading fan asking about him just before we hit record, actually. So,
brilliant.
and
Of
again,
course,
he's if Liam Fraser in League Two would have been
it's never
would
going
have
to
been quite
happen.
something. But
Never going to happen.
yeah,
I think we've yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of our pre-season, and I think it gives us a real good insight. I think we're pretty injury free as well so far, which is quite nice. We haven't
touch
had
wood.
many injuries. Yeah, correct. Yeah, I haven't got much near me, but yes, touch wood. It would be nice to have a more injury free season than what we did last season, but I guess that was due to happen after the season before, where it felt like we had no injuries. Played the same team almost every game. Um, so yeah, and that's it. I think for this week's episode. I would just like to add that there is now a new online club shop. There wasn't as of a couple of days ago, but then I actually missed that come out that had been. So looks good, and hopefully they'll get some further items in there because that's one thing this club is desperately undersold is any form of additional merchandise outside of clothing. It's been the same picture frame, keyring, and scarf for the last 5 years, I think, on the website. So it'll be nice to see that updated with other stuff that other clubs do sell, and I appreciate that comes at a cost. But if it's anything like the kit releases and training wear, where it's good quality bespoke stuff, then I'm sure they'll fly off the shelves as well. So yeah, fingers crossed. So that is all from myself and Louie, and we will hopefully see you over the course of the season. And until we do see you, come on, you Reds.
Come on, you Reds.